I'm going to start this video today with something I don't normally do in my videos, which is give a little bit of backstory on this computer build. This build is actually a replacement for an older build I did, the $777 AMD PC build. I'll put a link up at the end of this video if you want to watch that. But my buddy ended up with a really unfortunate set of circumstances with that computer. He was out of state working at the time and staying in an apartment building, and when he was at work one day, his apartment building actually caught fire. Well, his unit was not engulfed in flames or anything, it just had smoke damage, but during this process afterwards he was forbidden from entering his unit, and apparently the people that the apartment complex brought in to clean up the units, to clean up the smoke and fire damage, robbed or burglarized several of the units, and my buddy's computer was stolen. And he did end up getting a few $100s back from, I think, United Way or someone like that, a charitable organization who donated some money to help the victims of the fire. But unfortunately for my friend, his computer, which was very nice and almost brand new at the time, grew legs and was never to be seen again. So here we are today with the parts to put together to replace it. So I'm going to stick to my usual format. We'll talk about each of the parts and then we'll put everything together and see how it goes. Here's the motherboard we ended up going with for this build. It's a ASRock Extreme 4 on the B550 chipset. I did convince my buddy to spend a little bit extra and get this pretty nice board, which as I'm looking at it has some nice features I didn't even realize it had. It actually has a physical power and reset button, so that's really quite a nice feature. It has a little LED diagnostic display. You'll notice that some of the original packaging is missing. That's because this motherboard has already been sent back to ASRock to have the BIOS updated because it was not going to work out of the box with the 5700G processor I have. I just went through this process with the last Ryzen build I built that had the onboard graphics chip. So a bit of a pain, did have to pay, and well, my buddy had to pay to have this thing sent back to ASRock, so a bit of a hassle. Not really sure, other than trying to find motherboards that actually have USB flashback or living close to a micro center. I'm not really sure what recourse you have as far as getting a board with a BIOS that will actually boot with the G series Ryzen 5000 chips, because every motherboard I've purchased typically has the oldest available BIOS installed, and it's not going to boot out of the box with one of the newer 5000 G series chips. So a bit of a pain, but this thing should start right up now that it's gone back and had the BIOS updated. And really quite a nice board. Has lots of these heat sinks on it, which I'm sure some of them are unnecessary, these M.2 heat sinks, but they really do give a nice aesthetic to this thing. And it has lots and lots of plastic on it, which, you know, I love peeling this stuff. So this thing really checks all the boxes for a, you know, I'd say an entry middle level build. Here's the CPU we decided to go with. You already heard me mention that it's a 5700G, so a bit of a step up from my friend's last build. And really this is our workaround, since I'm sure anyone who's interested in PC building right now knows that video cards are basically unobtainium unless you want to pay double MSRP. So for my buddy who's looking to do some light gaming and some 1080p video editing, getting one of these Ryzen chips with a pretty strong onboard graphics is about the only solution out there for sub $1,000 builds, unless you just want to get taxed out the nose trying to buy a discrete graphics card right now. So this is about as good a stopgap as you can ask for, and this particular CPU is pretty powerful, so I think the performance will be good. And other than the graphics being maybe a little bit lacking, which these onboard G series graphics I think are roughly, in most circumstances, roughly equal to like a GTX 1030, so not terrible. But I think the overall performance, especially while keeping to a pretty, you know, not a completely minimal budget, but a sub $1,000 budget, this is going to be the sweet spot right here. Here's the power supply unboxed. It's a EVGA 700BQ. I haven't used this particular line, but EVGA these days is pretty much my preferred brand of power supply. It's bronze rated, it's semi-modular. They had this particular model on sale for a great price on Newegg when I purchased it. So I think this will be a solid supply for my buddy, and hopefully it'll outlast just about everything else in this build through multiple future builds. So excited to get to use a nice high quality unit. Here's the boot drive we ended up going with, the Samsung 980. This little NVMe drive has great performance, and I love this M.2 form factor. It's just so tiny and gives such a clean appearance, not having to have any SATA cables or anything like that. So this should be excellent for my buddy. It's a 500 gigabyte capacity on this one, so that'll be a nice start. Give him plenty of room for his operating system and any of his regularly used programs. Here's the memory we've chosen for this build. Nothing too crazy. Basically the least expensive name brand set that met the particular performance specifications we were looking for, which was 32 gig, 16 by 2 kit, at least 3200 megahertz, which this is. For networking, we have this wireless card. It's an AX3000 chipset on this. This card also has Bluetooth built in, which will give my buddy the ability to use his Xbox controller with his computer if he chooses to. And here's the extra drives that'll be going in this build. Just an old DVD burner. You can see this thing's been sitting in one of the junk computers for quite a while from the layer of dust on it, but just a basic DVD burner. And my buddy actually looked up, because I did have a 250 gigabyte Caviar Blue to use as a backup storage hard drive on this, but digging through the junk computers I did find this Hitachi, which is also, as you can see, is still about 10 years old. So it's not going to be a rocket ship, but it is a 7200 RPM drive, and it's also 1 terabyte capacity. So that'll be really good just for like redundant backups and things like that, and didn't add anything to the cost of this build. And of course, the elephant in the room, this thermal take case that we'll be building in. This is the one thing so far that I've got a little bit of buyer's regret about. When we purchased the case on Newegg, I'm not sure if this was a pandemic related supply issue, but there were just not very many inexpensive full ATX cases on there that weren't windowed RGB type cases. My buddy just wanted something basic and plain, and this case does meet those specifications. It was about $82 shipped, which isn't terrible, but my biggest complaint is that this case is a little bit on the lightweight side. The sheet metal's a little bit thin. It is fairly nice looking, although the fit and finish isn't the best. You can see some of these 5 1/4 inch drive bay covers are a little pushed in and uneven, but not terrible. But the real reason I'm kicking myself is that normally at this price point, and I don't know why I didn't think of this, but we could have just purchased the Corsair 200R directly from Corsair's website and had a much better case for the same money. That was actually the case we used previously for the computer that ended up getting stolen. So like I said, I don't want to shoot this case down before I've used it. It's a little bit on the lightweight side, but I think it's going to be just fine for this build. So, but I did just want to talk about that briefly with you guys. One thing I'm not a huge fan of with these AMD heat sinks is the fact that these shrouds, the letters are always oriented incorrectly for a standard, micro tower, ATX tower type case. So you actually have to take the shroud off and remove the screws from this upper plastic portion of the fan shroud and rotate it 90 degrees and reinstall it, because it's keyed a certain way. So you can't just pop this little bezel cover piece off and rotate it and reinstall it, which would be really nice if the engineers would do that. But other than that, the AMD mounting system I much prefer to Intel overall, having a nice thick backing plate on the motherboard, and everything does feel a lot more solid that way. I just wish that they would get these correct. If you're using a rack case or a desktop type case, it won't be an issue, because in those cases you can just flip the rectangular heatsink around 180 degrees to have the letters face the correct direction if you're viewing the case from the front. was just going to throw all the parts in the case and power it on because I'm very confident that everything's going to boot up first try, but since I do have this really nice power and reset button on the motherboard, I thought I'd go ahead and take this opportunity to test it out, make sure the motherboard boots up and everything. Oh wow, already coming to life. Hopefully get some picture out of this thing. May have to adjust the inputs on this television. I'm not sure if it'll automatically detect or not. Alright. Some kind of video out of this thing. Let me get a keyboard and mouse hooked up and we'll proceed. As I suspected, this motherboard booted right up. So we're in the BIOS now. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to installing the rest of the parts and putting everything in the case, and we'll boot it back up once it's finalized. Did take me a second to get that little M.2 heat spreader, whatever you want to call it, figured out. The M.2 armor, as ASRock called it, but it is installed correctly finally. Not sure if those things are really necessary or not, but they do add some nice aesthetics. Alright YouTube, it's been 2 or 3 weeks since I last messed with this computer. I pretty much got all the hardware working and set it aside, but now it's time to go ahead and get some software installed. I've got Windows 10 Pro installing, as you can see. I'm actually using the optical drive. The first thing I found laying around was a Windows 10 disk instead of the flash drive, so I rolled with that, and it's actually been moving along pretty quickly. I will say that having had this computer sit on my kitchen table here for a couple of weeks, I've maybe been a little bit too harsh on this Thermaltake case earlier in the video. It's actually kind of grown on me now. It's very nondescript looking. Yes, the sheet metal on this thing could be a little thicker, but really it's kind of a nice looking case. I will say that my opinion of it has improved. It wasn't too bad to build in, and I do like the aesthetics the more I have it sitting around. It just looks so nondescript, and it has some pretty hot rodded parts out in it, at least by my standards, so maybe it was a little hard on them, but it's okay. And there's one more thing I have to do with this case. Alright, I think I'm going to go ahead and call this one done. I've got all the software installed and working. Everything's pretty solid, it seems, very stable. I do have the XMP enabled on the memory, but no overclock on the CPU. Got some better internet browsers installed, retro game emulator, Microsoft Office Professional Plus 2019, permanent license, Audacity, DaVinci Resolve, GIMP, so pretty much anything you could need software wise. So pretty pleased with this computer overall, and thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to like and subscribe, and there'll be plenty more computer and audio related content coming down the pipe in the future.